Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's event, Circularity in the Automotive Sector, here at the ASEA Future Driven Experience. My name is Dave Keating. I'll be moderating today's discussion about the EU's end-of-life vehicles regulation proposal. And this is a really key time to be talking about that proposal because right now is when it is being examined and when its future implications are really going to start becoming clear. So each year, more than 6 million vehicles in Europe reach their end of life, and they're classified as waste. When end-of-life vehicles, or ELVs, are not properly managed, they pose environmental risks and result in the loss of millions of tons of materials from the European economy. So in order to end this environmental and economic waste, last year the European Commission proposed a new regulation on end-of-life vehicles. The proposed new rules cover the entire life cycle of a vehicle, from its design and market entry to its final treatment at the end-of-life stage. One of the main goals of the regulation is to improve the circular design of vehicles, making it easier to extract materials, parts, and components for reuse and recycling. Additionally, the new regulation sets out to ensure that at least 25% of the plastic used in vehicle manufacturing comes from recycled sources, and 25% of that should be specifically from recycled ELVs. It also aims to recover more and better quality raw materials, including critical raw materials, plastics, steel, and aluminum. Today, we'll be talking to policymakers, stakeholders, and experts to get their reactions to the proposal, and more generally, to talk about the path forward towards a circular economy for the automotive sector. Will this new regulation be a success? And how can stakeholders collaborate to ensure its successful implementation? To get us started, I would like to introduce here to the podium Silvia Vecchione, Senior Environmental Policy Manager at ASEA.
Today we are all here together because we are aiming at a common goal, which is increased circularity. And I will say that the Commission proposed regulation in this sense, in our view, is a key step towards more sustainability and innovation. As industry, we are fully committed towards a very sustainable and resource-efficient and competitive economy. Why is this dialogue on circularity and end-of-life vehicles essential and crucial right now? Well, you just said it, the time couldn't be better. As major manufacturing industry, we are already now today going towards major transformation and challenges, not only in the way we are manufacturing our vehicles, but also in the way we are recycling and managing their entire life cycle, including the end-of-life stages. Therefore, compliance with the ELV proposed regulation is for us not only a legal requirement, but is a profound commitment towards a sustainable future. As a vehicle manufacturer, we are fully committed to continue designing our products to promote advanced circularity, where materials are reused, remanufactured, refurbished, rather than discarded. However, while we embark on this transformative journey, we need a collective engagement and a collective efforts from all the stakeholders. First of all, the choice to adopt a regulation is, in our view, instrumental to provide an harmonized legal system that reduces environmental burdens, that boosts efficiency, and deliver significant environmental benefits across all EU member states. We also very much appreciate the intention of the Commission to include more vehicle types in the scope of the regulation, as well as regulatory measures to control ELV exports. This will retain valuable material in Europe, and this is a mutual beneficial outcome both for the environment and for the car industry. As we work to improve our circularity, we must ensure that we do not compromise other essential sustainability goals. A circular economy, in our view, must fully align with already existing industry framework and incorporate solutions that optimize the resource use while supporting decarbonization across the automotive value chain. To move forward effectively, we need clear and overarching targets that encourage innovation and competition. And we believe that we need to stay away from rigid frameworks that create inefficiency. While we are progressing towards decarbonization, a fragmented approach that looks into individual aspects of the automotive value chain may hamper innovation and our ability to deliver sustainable, affordable, and competitive vehicles, both for the European and the global markets. Also today, there are few additional points of the proposed regulation that I would like to stress. I'm sure that we will come back later to them also in our discussion. But first of all, the topic of recycled content. This is a critical one and needs to be fully discussed and addressed before further discussion regarding the use of other sustainable materials. In our view, targets must be feasible and realistic. They have to be based on a well-defined methodology that consider all the contribution from relevant and available product streams and technologies. We also would like to stress the need for a balanced extended producer responsibility system. Unlike many other consumer goods, end-of-life vehicles hold an intrinsic value, and this makes their treatment a unique case in the circularity. Regarding the proposed mandatory dismantling measures, we support a practical approach to dismantling for reuse and recycling, ensuring alignment with market demand and environmental benefits. Finally, we advocate for a realistic timeline that reflect the lengthy vehicle design, and changes in materials and design require several years for implementation. Therefore, sufficient time is really crucial, is really key to ensure a smooth transition without disrupting the supply chain and hamper innovation. In conclusion, we are very much looking forward to cooperate with all the value chain, with the policymakers, with the stakeholders to secure a sustainable future for the automotive sector through a collective engagement towards circularity, which can benefit, first of all, our environment, our community, but also our industry. Thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to productive discussion today. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Sylvia. And as you correctly point out, the automotive sector is a very global market. And so, of course, competitiveness concerns really enter the fray here. And that's already been identified as a main priority of Ursula von der Leyen's second term, which will start next month. And of course, we'll talk in this panel about how competitiveness is factored in here, both as a potential warning about overregulation, but also the benefits as we talk about the economic benefits of having a circular economy when so much material is currently being wasted. How could this regulation actually give Europe a leg up against its global competitors? So let me introduce to you now the panelists we have here today to talk about these issues. We have Gaël de Rotalier, who is team leader from Waste to Resource at the DG, Director General for the Environment at the European Commission. Go ahead and take your seats, Gaël. Then we have Fynn Hauschke, who is a policy officer on circular economy and waste at the European Environmental Bureau. We have Jean-Philippe Bahuaud, who is CEO of The Future is Neutral, part of the Renault Group and SUEZ, in collaboration with them. And we have Stefan Schmerbeck, who is Head of Future Technologies, Public Affairs, and Sustainability at Volkswagen. Thank you to all four of you for joining us here today. You all in the audience will have an opportunity to ask them questions at the end of the panel, so you can go ahead and start thinking about your questions now that you would like to ask our very knowledgeable experts here. So Gaël, I'll start with a question for you because the proposal came from the Commission. So I think a lot of people are eager to hear from you about your thinking behind the proposal. So what was the Commission's motivations for the proposal? What was its thinking in designing it the way that they have? Why now and why in this way?
Yes, thank you very much, Dave, and thank you for the invitation to us here as well. Good morning, everyone. Happy to be talking about this important proposal. So, yes, the genesis, so to say, of the Commission proposal on ELV. I think, well, it's no secret to anyone that circularity and circular economy is a really an important policy objective of the current and next Commission. And when the Commission was developing its agenda on circular economy, one of the first steps that was done is to screen the most important sectors, resource important sector, and where there's more potential in the EU economy. And that's how, while the EU and the Commission and the EU then developed many initiatives on batteries, on packaging, on construction, on textile. And obviously, then we also came to the automotive sector, which is one of the the main users of aluminium, number one for aluminium, number two for steel, number three for plastics, and also using more and more critical raw materials with the electrification of the fleet, and using also more and more composite materials, complicated, sophisticated one. And overall, I mean, these materials have an important footprint when they are sourced from material from virgin resources. And at the same time, there was a bit of an issue on how to better, as you've explained, use them after when the ELV become a waste and needs to be treated. And that was a bit the starting point. And the other starting point is the legal basis that we had. I mean, the ELV has been regulated in the EU since 2000. We had a directive, which at the time was quite an interesting, pioneering text, also promoting waste management and circular economy. But when looking at how it has been working in the last 20 years, we show that it had brought some improvement, but was falling short of many elements that now form part of what we would like to see as a major element for circular economy in the automotive sector. And that was first in the production design stage, how to ensure that all these materials that I've mentioned are coming more from recycled material, from recycled sources, but also how in the design production phase, they are all assembled so that it's easier to use them after an ELV become a waste. So a big potential there in that first phase in the design production, and then looking at the collection, treatment, export, and how could we improve the situation to move towards circular economy objectives and improvement at all these steps. So on the collection phase, a lot of cars get missing when they get older. Used cars, this is an amazing missing vehicles problems that affect millions of cars. What can we do on that to improve traceability? What can we do on the dismantling phase? A lot of, the cars are dismantled. The cars which are not missing one, they get dismantled. And you have figures about 85% recycled, which sounds like great for us working in the waste management sector. But actually, this is mostly about the metal, which is easy to recycle. And then the quality is often not very high in terms of metal scrap. And a lot of it is leaving Europe, actually. The export of scrap is a very important phenomenon that we have to look into. And that's also what you said a bit. We are seeing that as a possible loss of resources for the EU economy, and how as a dismantling and recycling stage as well, this could all be improved so that we are higher recycling rate, but also higher quality. I think this is a very important element in terms of also getting more resources staying in the EU, creating value in the EU, and improving the whole value chain of the automotive sector. And also looking at the export side, where there are a lot of exports which are taking place today of ELV, which should normally not take place because this is not allowed to non-OECD countries, but also of used cars which are not roadworthy, and for which we thought we need to also look into this a bit with a strict approach. And that's also why the proposal also touched upon this issue. So overall, I mean, if I have to summarize quickly, we really try to look into the whole life cycle, all the stages, and see how we could improve the situation via regulatory action. So going the step that is needed without going too far to compromise competitiveness and create more administrative burden, but while making a difference so that all the actors really can step up their efforts to move towards, a truly circular economy in the EU. So that's a bit how we came up to this proposal. Happy to continue the discussion later on, of course, on specific issues.
Well, just a follow-up question for you. Why was the decision made to switch from a directive to a regulation?
That's precisely when you look at the directive, it contained very interesting wording on using more recycled content or improving the design for circularity. But this was in a way which was practically not binding. This was very member states shall consider possible measures to encourage. And when we looked at the effect, the impact didn't have any impact. So we thought we need to be a bit more ambitious in the wording, and also, and I think that has been mentioned already by Sylvia, moving to situations where we have a more harmonized framework all across the EU and the member states, so that we don't have interpretations which differs from one member state to another one, which was the case as well in the case of this directive, which was not very specific on a number of instances.
Yeah, and just for the audience, so a directive is an EU law that's made that then member states transpose into their own national regulation. So it's like targets that they each have to meet, whereas a regulation is directly applicable on the member states. It's essentially a stricter form of EU law. And so sometimes directives work and sometimes they work less well, and the Commission takes a decision to switch over to a more binding form of the legislation. We can talk more later about what difference that's going to make. Fynn, let's turn to you next. What would you say from an environmental perspective is missing in the current proposal in order to come closer to a circular economy in the automotive sector?
Thank you very much, and thanks, Gaël, for introducing the proposal and why it's so important at the moment, and which is also why environmental organizations very much supported many of the measures that have already been mentioned, the EU-wide harmonized EPR system, the recycled content targets and other design requirements, but also the digital product passport that is proposed, and at the end of life, the focus on disassembly as opposed to shredding. So this is really something that environmental organizations support, but we wouldn't be environmental organizations if we wouldn't have any suggestions on how to improve the proposal. Among many things, I think a major point is that the proposal, from our perspective, fails to address the elephant in the room in terms of the environmental impact of the sector and of cars individually, which is that we have an ever-increasing number of vehicles on streets. Vehicles, on average, are getting bigger and bigger, and vehicles are also loaded with more and more electrical components, and this is paralleled by a surge in the environmental and the material footprint of the sector. So we suggest that the proposal, or from the beginning, we have suggested that the proposal should also include an environmental footprint measure, basically an LCA study that should be conducted for the type approval process, and then the information would need to be disclosed, for example, in the context of the digital product passport or the Circularity vehicle passport, which then also offers the opportunity to attach other measures to it, like in the context of the eco-modulation criteria or taxation on member state level. Then what we also suggest is that the proposal should have a stronger focus on eco-design. We already have recycled content targets, and there are a few obligations for specific components to be dismantleable, but we suggest that this list should be extended and also extended to the entire life cycle of the vehicle. Then in terms of the end-of-life management, I've already mentioned it before, environmental organizations very much support the focus on disassembly at end of life to increase the reuse of components, but also to increase the quality recycling. However, what we were surprised about is that we still merge the end of life targets, reuse and recycling together, and we would like to have a dedicated reuse target to increase the reuse of components, and this could also be supported by additional measures which I actually already suggested in the proposal, like reducing VAT on remanufactured components or requiring mechanics to also offer remanufactured components for repair operations. So these two demand and supply measures we think would go well together. And then finally, what we also create awareness about is in the context of the harmonized EPR system, is that at the moment it very much ignores that many of the used vehicles are exported to third countries, meaning that it's basically does not facilitate the EPR fees that will be paid by producers to follow into third countries, which then also means that the money won't be available for end-of-life treatment and collection in the third country or the importing country, which would then be most likely a Northern African country, where there's, countries that are much less economically equipped to deal with the environmental hazards of vehicles and, to really establish a circular economy. These some of the things that we think could be improved. So there's definitely some room for improvement.
Thanks, Fynn. Gives us lots to discuss in the panel. Jean-Philippe, let's turn to you next. So you're working with automakers on sustainability issues. How would you say that this proposal can make the auto sector more sustainable?
First of all, thanks for giving me the chance to explain a little bit what we do in that space. It's actually funny because we have on the stage everything we need to understand the situation, right? We have OEMs, companies working in the field of circular economy, the voice of the NGOs and the regulations. So it's very interesting to be able to compare and contrast the viewpoints. Just to give you a few words about who we are and what we do, just a show of hands, who have heard about Neutral already? The Future is Neutral, the name of the company. Great. Okay, so we're starting to have a bit of a name. A year ago, it would have been probably one or two people showing their hands. So it's good. We're progressing. A few words about who we are and why it makes sense for circular economy and the industry as a whole. I think that everybody in the room who reads the newspapers is aware of the major challenge of the energy transition. That is mobilizing a number of players in the automotive space. But there is an underlying in the background, an underlying theme or challenge that is also hitting OEMs and the auto industry quite fiercely these days. It's the use of virgin materials, so to speak, right? Because to make a car like that, OEMs do need virgin materials, and we want to increase the level of recycled content. But let's focus on that for a moment. If we take a helicopter altogether, okay, and if we take a picture from 10,000 feet above of all the vehicles that we have in the streets currently driving, the OEMs responsible for the production of those vehicles would be responsible for roughly the consumption of 85% of the palladium, rhodium that you can find on the surface of the planet. Okay, so OEMs do have a responsibility in the consumption of virgin resources, and that's true for many different materials. But that poses three challenges that OEMs know very well. First one is the sovereignty of the materials. Because Europe is great, but sadly, we don't have cobalt, we don't have nickel, we don't have lithium. Well, a little bit, but not that much in our ground. So having or helping developing the sovereignty on those materials is absolutely critical. That's issue number one. Issue number two, it's cost. And in a world where the lithium prices can be multiplied by 7 within the course of 24 months, where steel can be multiplied by 2 in the course of 24 months, the cost control is extremely important for OEMs to be able to master their roadmap overall. And the third one is obviously, the elephant is in the room, which is the environmental concern. Because whenever a vehicle is produced in Europe using virgin material taken from the ground in Africa, then refined in China to be assembled in Europe, it doesn't take a lot to understand that there is a problem from an environmental perspective here. So what we do in the Future is Neutral is we're trying to develop the concept of from car to car, which is exactly this, taking old cars. And I would argue that there are probably roughly around 11 million vehicles in Europe hitting the stage of end of life, coming to the 6 million that we see, in the dismantling centers. That was a reference in the introduction. But basically, if we're good at what we do, we could take everything that's inside this to make new cars again. Okay, and that's the concept of the Future is Neutral. And how do we do that? We have different operating companies that have been operating in that space for decades, covering the entire life cycle of a vehicle, providing recycled materials for the production of new vehicles, such as plastics, copper, palladium, rhodium, platinum, and so on and so forth. When it comes to the usage phase of the vehicle, we also have solutions in the field of providing reused parts or remanufactured parts, like you were mentioning, for the repair shops. And when it comes to the end of life of the vehicles, we have been able to develop collecting and dismantling centers, a network of dismantling centers through one of our company called Indra, that dismantles on a yearly basis roughly 400,000 vehicles in France, and that is expanding to Europe. And we're also working on the end of life of the batteries. So why am I telling you all this? It's because all of that, all of those operations, we do them today. The challenge is to become bigger and to have more impact and to work jointly with the OEMs, because there are definitely our, I would say, customer reach and direct stakeholders for the future is neutral. And we do that on a collaborative manner, because we're not serving only one OEM, we're serving all the industry in Europe, all the OEMs, OES, individuals, repair shops, insurers. And we believe that to have an impact, it's important to be able to leverage the regulation that's coming in and to also operate according to the OEM's constraints and the environmental constraints that we all know.
Great. Stefan, let's turn to you next. What is the auto sector's reaction to the proposal that's on the table now? And as we move forward in the legislative process, what are some of the things you'd like to see changed?
Yeah, Dave, thank you very much. And also from my side, good morning. Thank you for having the chance to be here. Yeah, my first answer is we do support the approach by the Commission to go to a modern economy, of course. We do really welcome this new piece of legislation. We do need to have a specific automotive legislation because an auto is very different to other consumer products. Our cars are on the street for 15 years and they need to be dealt in a different way, of course. But we see some space for improvement of this piece of regulation, and I would like to tackle on 3 issues for the time being. The first is something which has already mentioned by Silvia, is the 25% plastic content target. Today, it is not defined how to calculate this 25%. There's just this number. It is not defined yet which recycling technology is allowed to be used. Is it mechanical recycling? Is chemical recycling allowed? Also, the waste streams which could be calculated are not defined yet. So the methodology should come later on, but we have already a political driven number of 25%. Second point is we have not seen a supply and demand study on this. We have the packaging regulation in place. The packaging regulation also will ask for recycled content material. And we do see in the period of time, which is laid down in the ELV, that we will not be able to fulfill this 25%. And therefore, we ask to lower this target to 15%, to make a methodology, and then after some time, to raise this number and to achieve higher recycled content targets. Our products are on the street for 15 years, and of course, we are used to repair those cars. Yeah, we are used to repair those cars, and therefore, dismantling of the major components is something we do already today. And the dismantling obligation and the parts laid down in the annex go too far. For example, there is no market for a dashboard to be reused. Same goes for the wire harness. There are some parts which are highly integrated in the vehicle. There is no second market for those materials, and even to optimize recycling processes, why should they be integrated in the car to be made available for reuse or to be dismantled without harming those parts? This goes somehow too far. And the third point I would like to mention is we have a real problem with the unknown whereabouts in Europe. This has been mentioned already. And we simply need to enforce the existing regulation on this. There is the certificate of destruction available. And we should ask, or we should oblige the last user of the vehicle to present this certificate of destruction. He gets this when he gives his vehicle, which is still somehow roadworthy, but then he gives it to an after treatment facility, and then he gets the vehicle becomes waste in this moment, and he gets the certificate of destruction, and he needs to present the certificate of destruction to get rid of the vehicle in the books, or for example to get rid of his insurance, so that he is mandated, the last owner, to present this certificate of destruction, because we as a manufacturer have no contractual basis here. Yeah, it's in the ownership of the last user, and he should be obliged to do so. So there are plenty of things we would like to see adjusted in this regulation, but as said in the beginning, this is a good piece of legislation to come to a modern economy, and we are well prepared to design our vehicles for further circularity.
Great. So, Gaël, we've heard a couple of concerns about the proposal, so I want to put some of those questions to you. So, Fynn was asking about the combination of the targets for end of life and reuse, and whether those could be separated. So, is that why was the decision made to combine those two targets? And then also the question from Fynn about a harmonized EPR system, which ignores that many vehicles are exported to third countries. And so then the fees would be, the money would be kind of staying in Europe rather than going to those countries to deal with the vehicles. What's the Commission's thinking on those two issues?
So on the reuse recycling targets, we've been looking into that. Just to recall that in the current ELV legislation, this is the way it is phrased. So there is already this common target of reuse and recycling. And we very much also support the idea of promoting reuse of spare parts, used spare parts from the automotive sectors by repair shops or by OEMs, et cetera, et cetera. And there are a number of measures which are in the proposal which are aiming to do that. But when looking at the target itself, we looked into the practicality and how it would work, and the conclusion was that it would be too complicated to ensure that this is properly done and reported. So it's basically a practical argumentation that we thought it would not be feasible to get that properly reflected in the legislation. So happy to be a bit more, provide more in detail on that. But that was the main argument that we've looked at in detail in the impact assessment, which we had to do, and where we always have to find the balance between getting as ambitious as we want while remaining practical and feasible. And in that case, we thought it would not fit. But yeah, again, that doesn't mean that we are not also using this legislation promote reuse. So that's the first question. A second question on extended producer responsibility and the fees staying where the car is put on the market, or at least not getting outside the EU. I think that's an issue that we are also coming across, not just for cars, but also for in other areas in the waste legislation. I think for the first time, what we have in the EU in the proposal is that we are proposing a mechanism which would address this problem when a car is put on the market, let's say, for example, in Germany, as a new car, and then its life in another country, Belgium, for example. And there needs to be some cooperation between the producer responsibility organizations and the treatment facility, so that the money which was possibly paid in Germany then goes to the recyclers in Belgium. So we have this mechanism proposed now in the EU for the first time, and it's quite heavily debated as we speak. And I think, and this is already quite complicated. I think based on that, we could see if there could be some opportunities, but that's not in the proposal, to look into what could be done when it's about third countries. I have to say, this is also very complicated to do. I mean, we've been looking into it also for textile, for example, because there is a similar issue now in the Waste Framework Directive proposal on textile. And that means we need to have some interlocutors in the third countries, which is able actually to act as a focal point for that. And I think we can do that in the EU on ELV because we are legislating in the EU. But when it comes to third countries, this is much more complicated.
I wanted to put two of the questions that Stefan posed as well. So he was mentioning there at the beginning this certificate of destruction, that these certificates is not really being enforced very well at the moment, and that one idea would be to introduce an obligation for the last owner of the car to have that certificate of destruction. Is that something the Commission could consider? That was one question. And then the other question was requirements for reuse. he noted that, for instance, there's no way to reuse a dashboard, that there are components of a car that there really isn't a realistic reuse market. Is that kind of differentiation accounted for in the proposal?
Yeah, so on the first point, and that's on the overall issue of missing vehicles, unknown whereabouts, I think, what we're trying to do is increase traceability when indeed the ELV gets to the point that it needs to be treated and it needs to go to the legal operators. And that's why we have come up with some proposal on the certificate of destruction and when it should be handed over, by whom, and how this should be also properly recorded by the different authorities in the member states, so that indeed they have the information and they delete the vehicles from the registration authorities, from the registers. We've been really trying to nail down the problem. If there are suggestions on how this could be done even better in the EU legislation, we can also look into it, always eager to improve what has been proposed by the Commission. But I think on that one, what is key for us is also to make sure that in the member states there is proper cooperation first between the different authorities, because you have often the environmental authorities dealing with the ELV issues. And what is crucial is that they share the information with the registration authorities, which is often another department. And that this information is made in a digital manner, which is what we propose in the Commission, and also that this information is shared between one member state and another member state. So this is all setting up better cooperation on enforcement, ideally through digital means, so that the information flows well between one member state and another one, because often you have a car in a member state being driven in another member state, not properly deregistered, re-registered, and then we lose control, and there is no mechanism today to ensure that this information is shared. So there are a number of points which are in the proposal by the Commission to improve that, and we're also working with other colleagues in the Commission, DG Move notably, which is working on the registration of vehicles. I have to say, this is really something that we're trying to push, but that depends on many different actors, including, I have to say, in the member states, different authorities who needs to work together better. What we hope is that with our proposal, we are forcing them to work together. This is what we've heard from a number of member states, that they need different ministries to get together to come forward with a position, and we hope this can help out. And we are also working, again with DG Move, which is working on the roadworthiness legislation, which would also help out. So that's a bit the answer on that one. And then on the reuse, recycling of some spare parts. I think what I've mentioned is that for us, it's really a key element that we try to improve the current dismantling recycling process, so that we get more used spare parts which are put on the market. That we would like to boost this market, but also we get higher quality of recycling, so high quality recycling. So in that sense, the Commission proposed a number of obligations for disassembly of different parts of the car, which aim to get that objective. These measures, first, they do not mean everything needs to be removed by hand. There can be different ways of dismantling. And then what we have also proposed is that if there are other technologies which ensure that you get the same kind of quality at the end of the process, notably post-shredder technologies, then this can also work, and then you don't have to follow the obligation of removal and disassembly. So I think with that, we are really trying to get to that objective of getting higher quality scrap or parts, while not just proposing one single way ahead. But okay, there are also a lot of discussion on these points. We're also open to improvements, and already now, when we're discussing with the member states, there are some suggestions to get in that direction. So I think the debate is ongoing, but I hope, and I really think that we get to an outcome where the current dismantling and recycling process gets to something which is of a higher quality.
Jean-Philippe, as you well know, one of the big issues here has been the supply of recycled materials for the automotive sector, that has been a bit hard to come by. Now we will have, if the proposal goes through, we'll have these specific targets. Do you expect that to drive the market for these recycled materials? Do you think the supply will improve as a result of that? And particularly when it comes to electric vehicles and lithium-ion batteries, do you see this proposal as driving a big increase in the availability of recycled materials there?
Well, I think it's going in the right direction. But in my world, where there are already hundreds of people working on making recycling materials available on reused and remanufactured parts, I think we haven't waited for regulation to impose it. It started as a business, as an activity. And then regulation comes in, and then it shows the way, and that's really great. But just to give 3 examples and one thought about it. It's been already decades since we started collecting vehicles, end-of-life vehicles for dismantling. Okay, we do that in France. In France, there are probably 1,700 dismantlers, covering the ground. And with our company Indra, we have a network of roughly 400 dismantlers, which are already operating the dismantling of the vehicle. And as you were saying, not every part can be disassembled before being crushed, but this is already an activity that generates the valorization of, I would say, more than 95% of valorization from end-of-life vehicles. Okay, so it's already operating at a decent level. Second example on plastics. Plastics is a major challenge, and I'll come back to that to have a more direct answer to your question. But plastics is a major challenge, and we've been able lately to put in mass production a vehicle that has, on average, 40% of recycled materials inside. Okay, and on 2 very specific parts, two of those parts are made of 60% recycling plastics, recycled plastics, half of which coming from end-of-life vehicles. And this is just an example. It's not to say that it is possible to do it on a wider scale, because the issue in my world is the massification and the scalability of those operations to make that even more competitive for OEMs and to have a wider reach. But from a technical and organizational standpoint, this is possible. Okay, how or why do those targets are not widely, adopted in the industry? It's because the conditions for the massification, the volumes, in other words, is not necessarily here for every material, right? The plastics are probably coming from different areas. It could be from the bumpers of the end-of-life vehicles or from the other parts inside the vehicles. Probably also there is a bit of polypropylene inside the dashboard, so that's also could be a source. But I would say that the issue that we're facing and what we are working on and we're trying to solving on a daily basis is to be able to put on the market for OEMs the competitive recycled materials, the competitive reused and remanufactured parts, so that it can be massively adopted across the industry. And regulation, I think, is helping in that respect. The devil is in the details, and we have to acknowledge that sometimes investments are a little bit difficult without the readability or clarity on how the regulation will be developed in the coming years. So a call for a bit more clarity and roadmaps is definitely something that we have to think about. But we do it. I mean, the future is neutral today. If we take the revenues of each of those activities, from recycling to reuse to remanufacture to end-of-life dismantling and treatment, it's probably around 1 billion euros overall, right? So we do it, definitely. Now, can we do it better? We'll keep discussing and working with the policymakers in order to have the right angles to make that even bigger.
Well, Fynn, in order to have that recycled materials market really developing, obviously you need better collection. So how would you say the collection and treatment of end-of-life vehicles can be increased in order, as you were saying before, to drive both the reuse of those materials that can be reused and the recycling of those materials that are better recycled?
I think these are two issues, the collection and then the treatment. And in terms of the collection, I think we've already talked about one of the important things, which is addressing the problem of missing vehicles, because there are so many vehicles where we have no idea what happens to them at the end of life. And well, one of the solutions has already been discussed, but Gaël also mentioned that the major leap in this will come in another legislative package. And our suggestion would be to address this in this proposal. But also knowing that this might be somewhere else in the commission. So this would be important to address. And then on the other hand, what is also in the current proposal is the aspect of roadworthiness, that vehicles are only exported when they are roadworthy, which is great. obviously, and it will probably increase the number of vehicles that will be available on the European market for end-of-life treatment. And this could be even improved if we say, for example, that we put an age limit on vehicles that are exported, or an emission limit, so that we ensure that only clean vehicles or electric vehicles, for example, are exported into third countries, which would again improve the collection. And of course, you could also talk about different incentives in the context of the missing vehicles, that you incentivize the consumer to actually bring back the vehicle at end of life. So these are all measures that could improve the collection. And in terms of the treatment, I think there's no silver bullet. I think I've already mentioned several things that would increase the treatment. Our opinion is that the focus on dismantling is very important, and maybe also referring to what Stefan has said. Of course, those dismantling requirements are not only to improve reuse, but also the high quality recycling. And you gave the example of the wire harness, which includes a lot of copper, which then might contaminate other material fractions that come out of post-shredding treatment if you shred the vehicles, including the wire harness. So it's really about both, like increasing the number of components that are available for reuse, but also to improve the recycling at the end of life. And yeah, as I said, we are very much in favor of the dismantling, because it really separates the materials in the very beginning.
Well, Stefan, obviously the goal here is to have as much of a closed loop as possible, right? That's the goal for any sector for the circular economy. That can be easier said than done. And obviously, collection and treatment is a huge part of that. So from the auto sector's perspective, what does that closed loop system within a circular economy look like? And how essential is proper collection and treatment to getting that closed loop?
My first statement would be, at first we need to decide which goal do we want to fulfill. There is the goal to reduce substances of concern in the vehicle on the one hand side. And the second one is to close material loops. So we need a decision. There's a trade-off between those two goals. And we need to decide which way to go. I mean, today we might have PFAS in some plastic components, and we do produce those vehicles today. And in 15 years of time, such a vehicle comes back and being treated. So how to deal with plastics containing PFAS? You will not get rid of the PFAS, but shall we then use these materials for closed loop within our industry, or shall we go for the goal to reduce substances of concern? This is something which has not been solved in this regulation. To give us the opportunity to close loops, we need to get hands on the material. Yeah, the last owner decides where to give his end-of-life vehicle. He can give it to any after-treatment facility. Yeah, some are operated in our Volkswagen group system in a PRO where we are engaged, or an individual system, but also outside of our organization. And so how should we get hands? This is not anymore our vehicle. This is the vehicle then of the last owner, of the after-treatment facility, of the recycler, and whatever. So we need to buy back those materials. And especially for this closed loop target, we think that we have to fulfill this obligation by buying closed loop material from outside Europe in these days, because we do not see the market in 6-7 years of time for this closed loop material. I mean, we are willing to do so, but then we need to have the right of precedence to organize our waste by ourselves, to get hands on those materials, and then we can decide how to deal with this. But in this system, we have actually, the vehicle goes somewhere. Yeah, we as manufacturer have not any right to get this material. We can buy it from the market, and we expect that those markets will develop not in Europe in the time or in this limited time frame.
Okay, let me get you to respond to that. So Stefan says that he doesn't see a closed loop market within the EU in 6 to 7 years' time. Should it be possible to go outside of the EU to fill that closed loop market?
Right. I think it depends a bit on what materials we're talking about. Say, and also, I mean, looping back to the proposal by the Commission, where we are going the further is on plastics. Huh? So there is this target of 25% recycled content. And yes, this there's been a lot of work to come to this proposal. We have a dedicated report by the Commission Joint Research Center only on that topic, which was done also in cooperation, consultation with all the supply chain, the OEMs, the suppliers, the recyclers, the dismantlers, etc., etc. And we, of course, believe that this target is manageable, is feasible within the time frame that is set there. And just to explain a bit in terms of time frame, I mean, this target would apply, according to the Commission proposal, 6 years after entry into force of the regulation. So if we have the optimistic view that the regulation will be adopted, if we think that it will be adopted in 2025, then you have 2031, and then it would only apply to the new types, so the new models which are put on the market by then. That means in 2031, you will have a lot of cars which are old models, which will not be subject to the target. So only the new types, the new model, which will become subject to the target. So this is a transition phase which we see happening and which will allow to have this phase-in approach. And why the reason why we decided to have this 6 years period is precisely because we heard the arguments by the OEM and others that they need a time to feature a new design like this one, new design features, and that they cannot just come forward with something in 1 year or 2 years. So we really have the belief that these targets can be met, and the closed loop. I mean, the closed loop is just 25% of this 25%. So we are talking about 6% of plastics which should come from ELV plastics by 2031. And so we are not seeing that as going too far. We are currently in the current situation. We have about 1 million plastic waste which is generated from ELV every year in Europe, and the recycling has been quite low. And this is why we want to have this recycled targets to improve it. But at the same time, there are a lot of investments, technologies which are being developed, which are aiming to improve that. And of course, when we talk to different actors, they tell us a bit, sometimes not exactly the same thing, but for the recyclers, and some of them are here in the room, they absolutely tell us that they are able to produce the required quality, because we are very mindful of you need to have a proper quality of plastic recyclers to fit into new cars, and the quantity by the deadline set up. But for that, they would need that signal from this, from the demand side, so that they provide a sufficient supply, and that's why we have come up with this proposal, and with the hope that the way it is targeted and tailored would be absolutely feasible by the timeline that is being in the Commission proposal.
Stefan, you wanted to respond?
Yeah, to make it concrete, I mean, we need first of all a solution for substance of concern, and the second one is there's not one shredder being operated only by one OEM. So to have the recycled plastic only from Volkswagen to make a closed loop for Volkswagen. So I do not see this. I mean, the goal and the way to go ahead is good. Yeah, we need the methodology, but we need more time on this. Yeah, I see your target, and I'm behind this. But we really need to have the boundary condition and the ecosystem to do so.
Fynn, how confident are you that this closed loop market could be developed in 6 years?
Well, maybe a short clarification, because you just mentioned that there is no shredder that is operated only by Volkswagen. My understanding, maybe you can answer this, is that, of course, the plastics could also be used from shredders that shred vehicles from other brands, right?
Yeah. Now, in the Commission proposal, indeed, when we're talking about closed loops, it means car to car, but not Volkswagen to Volkswagen.
Is that really clearly described in this way?
Apparently not to everyone.
That would be of interest.
Okay, so one thing to take a close look at going ahead, I think. And so on the more general point, do you think that market can be developed in 6 years?
I do think so, yeah. And I think what has not been mentioned is that there's also a good balance between supply and demand measures. There's a dedicated end-of-life target for the vehicle as a whole, but also specifically for the plastic components. Obviously, also the dismantling requirements will lead to a supply of higher grade materials. I mean, there's no dismantling specifically for plastics, but this will also benefit the plastics, and taking materials out of the stream will also improve what comes out of shredders. So I do think there's a good balance between measures that will supply material, and then on the other hand, the recycled content targets, including closed loop, and then also other demand driving measures, for example, the eco-modulation criteria that consider the recycled content as well. And I think the Commission or the co-legislators should also consider this for other materials like steel. I mean, we have in the proposal that a target is considered, but I think it could also be considered to introduce this target already now, because we also see a bunch of supply measures in the proposal. And I think specifically also the recyclers would say, if you require us to supply this kind of material in a certain quality, then we also want a measure that ensures us that there will be demand on the market. And I think that's what this whole thing should be about. It's not like we want this measure only to supply a certain material, but we want a combination of measures so that the market is working at the end, so that this is a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Jean-Philippe, how confident are you about this market being developed in 6 years?
Well, I think that it's important to distinguish from car to car than from Volkswagen to Volkswagen, or from Renault to Renault, or Stellantis to Stellantis, right? It's really a different concept. And if you remove the brand out of the vehicle that's behind me, and if you consider that there are roughly 11 million of those vehicles that could be used as a source to supply virgin material, recycled materials, reuse parts, or remanufactured engines, the supply should be here to actually do something better than what we do today, right? And this is what we do. This is what we're trying to do at The Future is Neutral. It's really the concept of there is plastic in the vehicle, there is copper, there is palladium, there is rhodium. What matters the most is that those materials get back to the industry, the automotive industry, and do not fly away, in different regions or used for different applications. Because if that's not the case, Volkswagen, Stellantis, Renault Group, Fiat will have to dig in the ground for virgin materials in order to make a new vehicle, and that's what we want to avoid. The closing the loop in 6 years, I don't know. We're already closing the loop. So we're taking palladium, rhodium, platinum, copper, plastics, steel out of vehicles. And we're working hard to put them back into the production of new vehicles, right? How do we do that? We have a company called Gaia, and Gaia goes and buys that material to the dismantlers, and then operates by syncing different players of the transformation process in order to put the material at the level of quality of the automotive grade, potentially back to a player that can incorporate it into a new exhaust pipe, a new injection mold, and so on and so forth. So it's already working. The issue is not really whether it's going to work or not. The issue is, are we going to be at the scale required by the regulation at the target date? I understand and I believe that as a result of that, what is the most important is to create the conditions such that the investments in upgrading the quality of the materials, the investments in making the dismantling network operates such that when Volkswagen is providing some vehicles, let's say, instead of saying vehicle, let's say X kilograms of plastic, steel, and copper, there is something out of that enables the OEMs to meet their regulation targets. Because the issue comes as soon as the OEMs cannot actually close the loop in that respect. So that's what we're really trying to work on and to facilitate. And I like the idea that we might need to expand that, because a vehicle today is a combustion engine vehicle for, if I do the math, 87% of the new vehicles sold in Europe to date. But soon there will be more electric vehicles, therefore more copper, and then the battery. So what do we do with the cobalt, nickel, lithium that is going to be the plastic of the coming years? I think the industry is moving, but really the conditions to invest in those environments are extremely difficult to handle from a player perspective.
You want to come in? Fynn?
Yeah, maybe something that has been mentioned several times now is that there are many materials in vehicles, and that there are also many substances, and substances put a limit on what you can recycle or not. So one thing that we also really advocate for is to avoid this problem of saying that substances are in there so we can't really recycle this, is that we have full transparency on the materials that are in vehicles, substances of concern, obviously, but also including those substances where we might not yet know that they have hazardous properties, So really creating full transparency so that in 10, 15 years from now, we know what is in the vehicles, because only now we would start collecting this information really comprehensively. And we also have the digital product passport in the proposal that would then also enable the transfer of this information between different actors along the supply chain. So really creating full transparency on what is in vehicles would definitely help us at the end of life. And we wouldn't sit here in 10 years from now saying, well, there might be substances in some components of the vehicle, so we can't really recycle them or use the materials in new vehicles again.
Well, let's check if there's any questions from the audience. Does anyone have an audience question? Yes, we've got a cluster right here. We've got a microphone here. Take her in the front here. If you could say your name and where you're from as well.
Yeah, thank you very much. So my name is Franziska. I work for ZF, an automotive supplier, and also active in remanufacturing. So for us, it's also not new. We've been active in remanufacturing for over 60 years. And we really welcome the proposal, because when we look at remanufacturing and closed loop and circular economy, what we were lacking in remanufacturing was legal certainty. And this is something we get now through the proposal by clearly saying that cores or parts and components from remanufacturing are not waste. So this really, really helps us in driving our business forward. We just see the issue that the criteria that they're basically defined by the Commission to distinguish between waste and cores for manufacturing are too strict and will thereby potentially limit the availability. So that's one of our issues where we actually really welcome it and see it as a driver. But as you said, the devil is in the detail. So I would like to know how you see it, because now we talked a lot about recycling, but I think when we talk about circular economy, it's important that we talk about all the R strategies. How do you see the ELVR in terms of remanufacturing, for example?
We'll take all three at once. So you can hand it behind you here. I forget. You see her. Sorry.
I'm Morgan from Klepa. I actually have a question about plastic targets. So yes, the JRC did a study, but the type of polymers that were being used is actually broader than the rich definition that is currently in the proposal. Do you think maybe it was a mistake from the Commission? Because some of the polymers types are actually quite used in the automotive sectors, and right now we can't make them count towards the targets. And regarding the substances of concerns, it would be good to have more clarity about what to do. So yes, if we see that there is a substance, then does it in fact, will we adapt the targets because of that, because we can't use these substances, or do we accept it to a certain threshold?
And third question right here.
Hi, thank you very much. My name is Alexandra de Schoen, and I work for SUEZ, so a recycling company who is part of The Future is Neutral. And we're really delighted to have this partnership, and it's just such good news that the Commission has really been pushing forward, and we don't see it as, we see the Green Deal, and we know that in the past few months there's been a bit of a pushback, but on the contrary, we see competitiveness and the Green Deal really coming together, and our partnership with Renault and SUEZ in recycling more cars is really a testament to that. I just had a very niche question, but we've seen it, for example, on the packaging waste regulation revision, and one main issue that we see in general is the lack of enforcement. And this has not been tackled in this text. And what about the lack of controls? Any fines? How do we make sure? Even we can put any digital passport you want, but at the end of the day, if people don't do it, how do we check and we make sure that it's done? And that's really important, because we see right now, for example, for the incorporation of plastics in bottles, it's because virgin plastic is so much cheaper. It's much more interesting financially to just not do it. And who's going to check right now for plastic bottles? No one's checking. And even if there are fines, certain countries, for example, like Spain, have put in fines. The fine is cheaper than actually, so it's cheaper to pay a fine than actually not to conform. So that enforcement part, I think, would be great to add in. And then there's a little part about neutrality of techniques in general. We've had in debates with recyclers of do we need to pre-treat, not pre-treat, and I think all of these techniques can evolve in the next few years. There's lots of different ways of doing it, lots of different partnerships, and so I think it's really important to remain and to leave that leeway for recyclers to do as best they can according to the needs.
So Gaël, I'll put that last question to you first. You mentioned before that part of the motivation for going from a directive to a regulation was a problem with enforcement. Are those tools for enforcement present in the regulation proposed?
So when it comes specifically to the issue of recycled content, I mean, in the specific case of the cars, we have the type approval system, which is the unique type of systems to ensure that you can only, put on the market a new car if it has been subject to the control and scrutiny by proper type approval authorities, which would look into all the criteria that are required. So safety, emissions, and recyclability, recycled content. So that's different in a way from packaging, where you don't have the system, you have market surveillance, which is another one. But in that sense, you have a specific one, which we think is quite robust. At least it's probably at the EU level more robust than what you have elsewhere. All right, okay, so that's for the recycled content. That's really because the way that you're producing a car and how it is marketed and yeah. Then for the export, then it would be an issue of customs, mostly custom inspection services. And here, I mean, we have this new rule on export, notably of used vehicles, which I think is really, that doesn't exist anywhere, that you cannot export a car if you cannot prove it is roadworthy. Seems to be simple. I mean, you cannot export a car if you're not able to drive it in the EU, because why would it be entitled to drive elsewhere? And here we've been working a lot with the custom services on that one. So we are trying, and we will, in the Commission, we have the colleagues dealing with customs. We are working with the member states. Ultimately, this is also an issue on which we need full support from the enforcement agencies in the member states. We have put up as much as we could in the Commission proposal as to what can be done at the EU level, and we're happy to follow up with them as well on the export side, also with colleagues dealing with waste shipment, etc., etc. So that's clear that enforcement is key. And we've, as said, we have as robust provision as we have in the EU legislation, and then would work with the member state on that. But I also agree it's not an easy task, and we are seeing that sometimes it's what is coming into the EU territory is not exactly what we thought it should be. Maybe just I can also take the other question on the definition of plastics. I mean, that's very much spot on, and that's, I mean, we have worked on the basis of what is in the GRC report on the definition of plastics, and that's definitely how it should be as well in the proposal. So we are working now with the member states to do some adjustment if that's needed to ensure that there is no discrepancies and what we're targeting. Well, we're not targeting elastomers, for example, but we are really targeting the plastics which are the most used in the cars, and also having some provision possibly on the substance of concern in that respect. So just on that, other questions.
The first question on criteria I want to put to Stefan. So having that clear distinction between what is waste, what is not waste, and having that not limit availability, are you confident that the proposal can make that criteria correctly?
I mean, my first statement would be, when a vehicle becomes end of life, it is still a valuable good. Yeah, it is a price. Such a vehicle has a price still when it is not anymore roadworthy of about €1,000 plus minus, just to give you a rough number. And of course, we are used to take parts out of this vehicle to reuse, to remanufacture. And yes, to be more precise, how we are allowed to do so is good, but this is something which is already there. Yeah, we do so for several decades already. So we do not need more specific demands for to foster remanufacturing and reuse of parts. This is something we do already.
Can I just make comment on the question as well? Because I think, what the Commission proposal says is that indeed parts which are directly removed from ELV and for direct remanufacturing should not be considered as waste. And we understand you're fully supportive of that. But then you're also saying it's not clear enough. So I think for us it would be useful to know why it's not clear enough. And then, of course, then the question is how much in detail should you go in an EU legislation where you need to clarify. But then, of course, sometimes we're also being told that we should not regulate everything in Brussels.
That's the message you're receiving right now. Sure. We have time for one last question from the audience, if anyone has one. Yes, over here.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Veronica, and I'm speaking on behalf of the European Recycling Industry Confederation. I was basically wondering if you could please elaborate a bit more on the environmental benefits of a closed-loop system versus an open-loop one that is working in a good way. And then secondly, coming back to the point you made specifically on batteries, for instance, We do think that there is a lot of space to work on the development of a secondary raw material market for substances included in batteries. However, there are also important design connotations that need to be better considered, as I think a lot of valuable materials are currently being lost due to batteries being, for instance, glued to the vehicles rather than screwed to them, which would make disassembling more easy. Thank you.
So I think this is a good question for Fynn. So what would you say is the environmental benefit of a closed loop system versus a more open system?
Well, I think the environmental benefits are pretty clear. If you replace the primary raw material with secondary raw material, then you usually have environmental benefits in terms of CO2, whatever, at least for most of the materials. Maybe also coming back to one of the other questions, which was about enforcement. I think I'm super in favor of enforcement, and it's a really big issue in most waste issues, if it's export or if it's electronics, etc. But I think you can put it also the other way around and say your company peers will stick to the rules that we have made, within which we all have to act and make it work. So it's not only about the Commission having to enforce or the other authorities, but also companies just sticking to the rules without being told to stick to the rules. I think that's a very important point, but obviously also there needs to be more resources for enforcement. And I think, obviously vehicles is a big field if you look at the 3.5 million missing vehicles.
Jean-Philippe, would you agree that there's environmental benefit to being as closed as possible?
Right. I'll give you two examples. One is on remanufacturing and the other one is on the big picture. Remanufacturing an engine basically is about saving 80 to 90% of electricity and water compared to building a new engine. And it's also 30% cheaper than a new one for the repair shops. Okay, so in a world where consumers have to pay increasingly higher prices for their vehicles, having an option such as remanufacturing is definitely key for environmental and economical reasons. So is there a market? For sure. Devil is in the details. Let's not overcomplicate the situation. When it comes to batteries recycling, so if you take a battery today, let's take an NMC battery, because chemistry is important in that respect. The nickel, the cobalt, and the lithium that's inside the battery, some way has to come back to Europe in whatever way or form. How does that happen? There are two processes. There is the shredding of the batteries, and then there is the refining of the black mass. Okay, the shredding, it's complicated, but not as complicated and not as capex intensive as the refining part of the equation. Okay, what is important in Europe is that the conditions to invest in refining and shredding are met, such that you have an industrial tool that can take a battery out of a Volkswagen or a Renault or a Nissan car, and that can shred it and refine it to get the cobalt, nickel, lithium in Europe. What are the blockers today? One, the capex in Europe is much higher than the capex in Asian countries. Second, today still there is a bit of tightening in the regulation that needs to be done, and I would use that kind of audience to call for help on 4 areas. One, I think we need to ban the export of black mass to countries outside of OECD in order to keep the cobalt, nickel, lithium within the boundaries of Europe. Second, we have to classify as much, I would say as fast as possible and as clear as we can, black mass as hazardous waste, not only the final black mass product, but all the intermediary products that compose it, in order to avoid black mass tourism, going outside of Europe, coming back in, and so on and so forth. 3, export within OECD countries need to be done in a way that the conditions in the country of destinations are done in the same way that it would be applied in Europe in terms of health, environment, and security. Last point, we need the cars. if there is no electric cars on the market, there is just no batteries to be recycled. So in order to have the sovereignty and the competitive prices on cobalt, nickel, lithium that we all want, we need to be able to have the cars first on the market. So anything that gets in and supports that development is going to be good news for the industry, also for the recycling industry.
We may have coined a new phrase here today, black mass tourism. I like it. That's all the time we have for this discussion. I think really a lot of progress made here in terms of identifying what the areas of concern are, what might change during the legislative process. So I want to thank the panelists for some really interesting insights. How about a round of applause for them? And that brings our panel to a close. I invite you to continue the discussion amongst yourselves. Check out the exhibits downstairs. And then after that, I hope you all have an excellent rest of your day. Take care.